Jujutsu Kaisen used to be one of the coolest battle shonen series ever. After the Shibuya arc, however, the work suffered a severe decline. What exactly happened and why do so many fans think this way? The fanbase. The fanbase of JJK is huge, but it is known for one thing in particular: spoilers. In all the years I've been reading manga, I don't think I've ever seen as many spoilers as I have for JJK. I knew all the important plot points back then, even though I had only watched JJK up to Shibuya. And that was just because I was on Twitter for a second. But because I wanted to experience the end of JJK for myself, I read up on JJK in a few weeks. And even then I was spoiled. I first saw that Gojo had died on Twitter instead of in Shonen Jump. Spoilers are always problematic, of course, but I feel like the JJK community has reached a whole new level. Even my friends who had nothing to do with JJK knew what happened in some chapters. If you've watched the video up to this point, please subscribe to the channel. I've noticed that the most of you aren't following me yet and it would really help me out a lot. Now enjoy the rest of the video. Hakari vs Uraume. This battle occurred simultaneously with the Sukuna Battle. It's actually an extremely cool matchup that could make for a very exciting battle. And what does Gege do with this battle? Absolutely nothing. Most of it takes place off screen. I don't even know why he decided to do that. Hakari has a super cool ability and is generally one of the fan favorites. So why didn't he get a cool final battle? Probably because Gege wanted to finish JJK as quickly as possible. And since the Sukuna Battle was obviously more important, Gege focused solely on that. So Hakari's fight just took place off screen. After Sukuna died, Uraume saw no point in continuing and just gave up. Personally, I found this conclusion extremely unsatisfying because one of the coolest JJK characters didn't get a cool final fight. Gojo's death. For many fans, this was the trigger that caused JJK to take a turn for the worse. But why is Gojo's death so problematic? First off, it's strange to just kill off the most popular character by far. There's a reason why many mangaka never let their favorite characters die. And if they do, it requires a precise plan, foreshadowing and a good setup. But Gojo was simply killed off screen, even though the previous chapter had ended with Gojo defeating Sukuna. In his final chapter, Gojo finds himself in an airport. In his last moments, he praises Sukuna and says how difficult the fight against him was. This conversation seemed very out of character for Gojo. Gojo was always a very arrogant character who knew exactly that he was stronger than everyone else. The fact that he only talks about Sukuna and how great he was in his last moments just seems strange. He doesn't mention any of his students in a single sentence, even though they were actually the most important thing to Gojo. It was also difficult to take the whole thing seriously because of the extreme amount of memes. The "nah, I would win" meme was everywhere. When you see Gojo being cut in half by Sukuna at the end, it's hard to take it seriously. At least I couldn't. At that point it had been clear for a long time that Gege never really liked Gojo, and I think that was also evident in his departure. The battle against Sukuna. This battle is the last important part of JJK, and for me this battle was probably one of the low points of the entire manga, but let me explain. The battle was just very predictable. First, a new sorcerer enters the field, then he fights Sukuna until Sukuna fatally wounds the sorcerer, and then a new character simply enters the battlefield. First Kashimo, then Higurama, then Yuda, and then Maki. I'm not saying that the fights don't have any highlights because of that. There were definitely some cool moments, but when a fight is too obvious, it just takes away all the tension. It seemed to me like Gege was trying to build artificial hype. Of course, it's kind of cool that each character had a one-on-one fight against Sukuna, but in the end, these very strong characters seem like dust particles when they fight Sukuna for one chapter until they are replaced again. It just seems incredibly repetitive. It's as if Gege threw every JJK character into the ring, no tactics or ulterior motives, just so Sukuna can farm more aura. I mean, why did someone like Miguel have to fight Sukuna, for example? It adds no value expect that Sukuna can fatally wound one more sorcerer. You're just waiting for the main character to enter the stage because he'll probably put an end to all of it. Character death. At the very beginning of JJK, the manga had a reputation for killing off all characters, even fan favorites. But apart from Gojo, Kashimo and Choso, everyone else survived the battle against Sukuna. Nobara, Higurama, Kusakabe, Yuta, Todo, and probably even Kenjaku if you look at chapter 270, but that's not certain at all. What bothers me the most is probably that Nobara survived. Don't get me wrong, I love Nobara. For me, she was one of the coolest JJK characters, but I just didn't like that she appeared out of nowhere at the very end. It completely nullified her death and the feelings people had about it. Her death was a major factor in Yuji's development. It just doesn't feel right that she survived the whole thing, just so JJK could have another hype moment. Higuruma also had a tragic moment. Sukuna used one of his strongest attacks and it looked like he had killed Higuruma. But after the fight is over, he sits there and explains that Sukuna wasn't actually serious. If he had been serious, Higuruma would definitely have died, and that's just incredibly cheap. Yuda didn't have to suffer any consequences either. He took the risk and used Gojo's body in the fight against Sukuna, only so that he survived at the end like everyone else without having having to suffer any consequences whatsoever. Where exactly is the point if Gege has said beforehand that this move carried a huge risk only for nothing to happen in the end? Wasted characters. Yuki is a very mysterious person from the start. Her conversation with Gedo was one of the coolest moments in the entire JJK series, but we thought that was just the beginning. In the Culling game, she becomes increasingly visible until she eventually confronts Kenjaku. That's where we see her ability for the first time. Against all expectations, Yuki dies in this fight, and that's it for her. Everything has been thrown overboard. The same thing happened to Kashimo. Kashimo is considered one of the strongest sorcerers. He desperately wants to fight Sukuna, and instead of doing something cool with him, he is just randomly thrown into the fight against Sukuna. First, the two fight, then he gets to farm aura, and then he dies. All of this happened in less than 2 chapters, and these are not isolated cases. Especially in the last arc, it is striking how many characters hit a wall. Gege Akutami, the mangaka behind JJK. At the end of Shibuya, we learn for the first time that Gege Akutami is very ill. His condition is getting worse and worse. It has even reached a point where Gege has to take a 3-week break. He also complains from time to time about the weekly release schedule and how demanding it is for him. In addition, his team was changed after the Shibuya arc. Of course, they are only editors and Akutami makes all the decisions, but editors can also have a strong influence on the story. For example, without the editors of Naruto, the first tournament arc would have never been created. The sequel to JJK was recently released, but Akutami is only writing the story and no longer doing the drawings. His illness and constant stress were probably one of the reasons why the ending of JJK feels so rushed. Akutami just wanted to get it over with quickly. He has learned from this and is therefore only writing the story for the JJK sequel. Modulo. The sequel to JJK takes place 86 years after the Culling games. The story centers on the siblings Yuka and Tsurugi. They encounter the alien Maru doing a mission. Modulo takes place in a normal JJK world, but with the addition of aliens as a small twist. As I said, Akutami only writes the story. The drawings are by Yuji Iwasaki. He is otherwise only known for rather unknown one-shots and other series. But his illustrations are very beautiful. They remind me a lot of Detective Conan and all has such an old 90s anime vibe. Unfortunately, I'm not up to date with Modulo anymore, but the chapters I read were very nice. Conclusion. So has JJK gotten worse? For me personally, definitely. I had a lot more fun with the Shibuya arc than with the Culling game, for example. Nevertheless, there were still some highlights for me. But what about you? What do you think of JJK? Do you also think it has gone downhill? Feel free to write your thoughts in the comments and see you next time.